Yay!
Hey, there you go, huh? How about
Hi,
that?
Ryan. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Andrew. How are you on this fine Wednesday evening?
I'm doing well. I can't believe we've made it to day 8 of our 12 Days of 12th Night Festival. Pretty
I know,
exciting stuff.
it's pretty amazing if you think about all the stuff that's been on the internet over the past week. I mean, we've taken our way from trees to dancers and acrobats to gesturing and concerts. I particularly loved the little concert we gave on or offered on Sunday, which was great fun, and the community chorus show last week with Darren Wood and our playwright Harvey Blanchett. And I'm excited to continue on today. But before we continue on, we would like to thank everyone at Rhode Island Commerce who offered the Chorus of Westerly a very generous Heart ESR grant that made all of this possible, including our old Christmas Pops release that happened just before Christmas. Thank them for that, making that possible, having all these wonderful guests appear all week with us, and also to send a big shout out to our friends at the Blue Mitten Thrift Shop, and a huge shout out to all of our friends at the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts.
Excellent. Well, we are very, very pleased tonight to be able to bring you a guest who goes way back, both with the Chorus of Westerly and with Twelfth Night, and has worn many hats over those years, most visibly, as we just saw, as the musician and leader of the Westerly Morris Men, but also many other things behind the scenes, and was not only part of the original Twelfth Night cast, but was actually part of bringing Twelfth Night to Westerly in the first place. So we're going to pick his brain a little bit right now about what those early days were like and how all of this came to be. And please welcome to our screen, Peter Leibert. Thank you for being with us, Peter.
It's a pleasure. And it was such
Hey, there we go. From the little village of Preston, Connecticut, right? Or am I close?
Preston City, yeah.
Preston City, Connecticut.
Yeah.
Not so big little village.
And what a treat it was to see all of us up there dancing again.
You all looked very good, and you look great in glorious high definition too. It's I felt like just looking for some either sticks or hankies here around the bedroom that I'm recording in to do my own bit.
I think that was always one of the things that the stage crew so enjoyed, was whenever the Morris Men would go up, they would dance around in the lobby there as well, with the doors open, to participate in it.
And that was usually on Sunday night, the last performance. They would all get together, and that's what community is about. I mean, it was magic.
It was, absolutely. So, Peter, your involvement with the chorus did not begin with Twelfth Night. What was it that actually brought you originally to the Chorus of Westerly and got you into this?
Well, I think the simple answer is my parents. My mom and dad were both part of the chorus. I not for many years, quite briefly, as a matter of fact. When I came home from college, I think in the 60s, early 60s, they mentioned this character that taught at Rhode Island College and went fishing on his way to classes and so forth and so on. And then I eventually met Bunky at my parents' house when they had, I think, Bunky and Lynn and Ann and George over for supper. And that's really what got me going on it. I went with Jane to a performance of the chorus. At that time, it wasn't Twelfth Night, I think. It was a celebration of something at Christmas. And we just listened, and it was absolutely wonderful. And I became part of that because of my past history, which of course was it goes way back.
Yeah, so that's actually another thing to go down. Twelfth Night here was a pretty long-standing tradition, but its roots go back even further than our show in Westerly, obviously. So how did you get involved with that? Where did you first learn about what became Twelfth Night?
Oh boy, a similar event occurred in New York City back, oh Lord, I was probably 4 or 5 years old. And the Country Dance and Song Society, which my parents were very involved with, had what they call the Christmas Festival and Spring Festival. And at that time, they had country dancing instead of singing primarily, Morris dancing, sword dancing, and guess what? A mummers play. And I remember being I think I was St. George. I was slain. I know I was lying on the floor, and I was probably 18. And I remember somebody busted their lines. Something happened. And I just laughed, and everybody could see my stomach going up and down as I was laughing. And of course, the audience broke up. But then I thought, well, that's part of this whole thing. It's
Absolutely
active stuff. So that was my first introduction to this stuff. And then I kept going with the Country Dance Society, got involved with Pinewoods Camp after I graduated from college. There many years teaching Morris and Soil. And then came back to live here in Preston City. My parents were not involved in the chorus any longer, but had great friendship with the Utters and the Kents.
Mm. So talk a little bit about the Langstaffs and what they were doing up in Boston and that connection.
Yeah, Carol Langstaff, I refer to as my sandbox buddy, because I've known her since we were about 4. And my parents knew Deanne, her mom, and we did all sorts of crazy traditional stuff in New York. Deanne is the person, incidentally, who discovered the Clancy brothers and brought them over here. And so we had a lot of involvement with that. And Carol was involved with the first 12th night, actually. She came down, I think she was the director, and she worked with Ann Utter and Bunky. And of course, a dear friend, I got involved. And I think, as I recall, the Pinewoods Morris men, for which I was the 3rd squire. Squire is the sort of leader of the pack. And I was the first, 3rd, I think. And anyway, they were on that show. And I'm trying to remember whether we did Abbots Bromley. I think we probably did. But I may be mistaken, because Abbots Bromley certainly developed shortly after that, because of my involvement with Abbots Bromley going back to the late 50s, and at Pinewoods Camp, where I was involved with that.
It's interesting because of course, in the office we have copies of the archives and old programs. So I think when you were talking earlier about some of your introductions to the chorus, the very first program that the Chorus of Westerly called a celebration of Twelfth Night was not. It was, which is probably what you went to. It was actually part 4 of the Christmas oratorio.
Yeah,
like, with a poem and snacks. That's what that's. And so, but it's funny because if you open up, we don't always count that one because it's sort of like it just happened to be the concert happened to be on 12th night. That's so it seemed like, and then of course when this first show happened. And I don't have the program handy. It's too bad we didn't bring it up tonight. But I think you're right that Abbots was on there. It's very interesting to see over the next we're in the middle 1970s now. Over the next couple of years, a new element sort of get added to the show every year. It went from just carols and poetry and a little bit of dance to starting to weave in other things. So how did actually? One of the things that got weaved in, one of the early things it seemed to be, was bringing in the gift of mirth, the jesters, if you will. And I think it was Fred Garbo who was the first one who came in, but also the actual Westerly Morris men coming into the show. How did the Morris men in, the troupe that we have now here locally, how did that come about and how did they get involved directly? I mean, obviously through you, but when did that begin?
I'm not even sure which performance that started with. I do know that I was teaching at that time it was called the Center for the Arts. Mm-hmm. I was doing a country dance class there. Believe it or not, I think it was 50 or 51 nights a year on Sunday night, all nights, from I think it was 6:30 until 9:30, and we always went around the corner to, I think it was called Roxy's, and we had pizza and certainly not beer. And
so Peter, so just a little bit more about how the Morris men got started there at the Center for the Arts early on.
Right. I was teaching a country dance class downstairs 50 nights, 50 weeks a year. And we met at 6:30. We went to Roxy's afterwards and we danced until 9:30. And in those days, I was using basically vinyl for the dance, the music, because I was not adept at playing country dance tunes. I could play a few Morris tunes. But we did that for I don't know how long. And then during that involvement, interesting thing happened. I decided to try and get a few people doing Morris dancing. And George Utter, of course, was one of our dancers, and he got involved. And good old George. I mean, he was the backbone of getting us really moving on our tours of England and so forth and so on. So we went to our first tour in England, and out of that, Mr. Garland, wives of most of the Morrismen, got really interested in basically border Morris, clog dancing, and whatever. And they came back, and Mr. Garland developed out of that, certainly through the efforts of Lorraine Utter and Joe Nickel, and I'm not sure who else at that time. But so there were two teams that really developed at that time, and Westerly started to really take off.
Wow.
So there originally you said it was the Pinewoods Morrismen. How many years did it take for Westerly to develop its own enough to be involved?
Well, Pinewoods Morrismen was a separate entity, and they were in Massachusetts.
Right.
And I was basically the squire briefly, and then I came down and basically got a group interested mainly through the country dancing, and it probably took a couple of years to get started, and we danced at Conn College for many years, and I taught there for 37 years, and so when I was first teaching, people probably thought I was a little bit nuts, because I'd have the Morrismen come into the Incoming Arts Center and practice in one of the studios at night. And George always used to get a kick out of that. I mean, George was a real character.
Great way to describe him.
You knew George. He was the kindest person you could ever imagine. But if you went out to eat, and he was our bagman, which is our treasurer. And he of course would, I'd tell him what, that we're going to pay the bill, and the tip he'd leave, you wouldn't believe, like 8%. And I would just jump down on him and say, George, what is wrong with you? I mean, he's the kindest man in the world, leaving a tip of 8%.
So when did you? So the dancers are going. Things are starting to roll. The dancers are. Your team's involved in 12th Night. Was there a moment, say in the 80s or whenever it was, where you looked, with Ann and Bunky and all of them, and said, "Hey, we really got something going here"? Was there, or did it just sort of ease into that? I mean, did you have a moment like that?
No, I think it eased into it.
Yeah.
I kind of think after the first thing with Carol Langstaff, that it eased in probably 4 or 5 years after that. Things started to really pick up. We had different characters that were doing different things, and we had hilarity happening, afterwards and beforehand. And during the performance, things would go nuts and people would just laugh. And there was a community. I mean, that's what this whole thing was about.
Mm-hmm.
Downright. I mean, it was a community. It was about kids too. I mean, that's terribly important. And I think that one of the things that happened that pulled part of this community together, that Anne insisted on, she wanted me to call dances after the last performance. So after the after party, so to speak, in the center, I would play with Damon, and we'd do contra dancing or country dancing. And we had a good crew. I mean, we would have 15, 20, 30, 40 people joining in. And that went on for about 4 or 5 years, I think. And Anne would say, Peter, you got to do this. You got to do this. And then finally, eventually what happened is I said, fine, we'll do it. But I'm not going to spend all my energy trying to get people to do it. If they want to do it, they've got to ask to do it and want to do it. And that sort of petered out, which was okay. Things last a certain amount of time. But I think at that point, from then on, other things happened. There was just this magical, magnetic attraction of everybody in there to get this thing going and rolling, to be a wonderful, wonderful celebration of this time of year.
Mm-hmm. I actually have some wonderful memories from my own childhood of being in the chorus in the late 90s, when that tradition must have returned of you calling the dances, because I can remember being there until I think well after midnight on that Sunday night with you and Damon leading dances for us.
Yeah.
I vividly remember walking home to Pawcatuck at about 2:30 in the morning once in the snow. God bless my mother for trusting me for making that walk. I think she's like, I'm going home. It's also funny if you think back to not just 12th night, but concerts and performances in general in the region. You know, the chorus routinely would present most of its performances on Sunday nights, or at least one of them at 8 o'clock. Now, Peter, if we tried to schedule anything after like 6 on any night of the week, or particularly on Sunday, no one would come. It's just the dynamic in audience is so much different now than it was then. But I think you're right. There was something about, having not just the chance to put together such a magnificent show as a community, but then be able to actually take a deep breath and celebrate it afterwards. That was always so important.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And, it's interesting. I was thinking back, my kids, the chorus has always been about kids. It's certainly about other things too, but kids have been a very important aspect of it. My children, Kristen actually was, I think, a rabbit in one of the performances, and Peter was a skunk, and went down the aisle and flip up his tail. And then of course you've got and Peter also did the dry ice. So as he grew older, he became the dry ice master. And of course Damon fiddled. And I don't know whether you remember the performances when he was step dancing and actually did a somersault playing the fiddle on stage.
Very impressive.
And then he developed and went on to become basically the sound tech. And they all had a very deep involvement. And most of our kids, grew up hearing music. I mean, Jane playing her harp downstairs, and I would always practice. So they grew up with that sort of a background. Damon did classical, basically violin, believe it or not. And so our kids had a great involvement with this, as did other kids. Jane reminded me the other day, in the very first performances, going way, way back with just after Carol, or even with Carol, Jane was stuck downstairs babysitting with all these monsters tearing around and yelling and shrieking and trying to keep them under control. And in those early days, we didn't have much time to practice. We started, I think, the day after Christmas, and we went through New Year's. And then at New Year's, all of a sudden it became apparent to us, and this was probably the second year in, that the principals didn't have a place to go for New Year's Eve. So we started having people over here for New Year's, and we'd have a New Year's Eve party. And out of that developed, you've heard of the burning of the broom. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that tradition developed out of all of the folks coming here. And it used to be that our rehearsals started at really the day after Christmas, and then usually it was very quick after that. We didn't have long rehearsals. I mean, like it would start Wednesday, then Wednesday night would be the dress, Wednesday tech, Thursday night dress, Friday night first performance, and then we're set to go. Michael Grando was one of the directors many, many years ago. A very famous mime, actually, in his time, and a great guy. And we had a number of wonderful directors, but our rehearsals were nuts. I mean, they started out and they were just bang, 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 like that. Not, a week or two before, very carefully crafted and whatever that happened later, which I think was important, because the crafting of everything later on with Anne's scripts and everything else became a very serious undertaking for people, but it never seemed serious. And that's what the magic of it was.
Mm. Yeah, so you've touched on it a couple of times already, but I think one of the things that was so driving, and the thing that brought people together and made them feel that community, is the intensity of all of it, the intensity of time, that there was only a short amount of it available to get everything ready to go, that everyone had to play their part and work hard to get it ready because there wasn't time to mess around. But on top of that was all of the other wonderful social things that you've mentioned as well, and getting together for New Year's Eve and spending time together dancing after the final show to celebrate it, to as much as all of the wonderful people who cooked meals for all of us who were here day in and day out. That was a constant, fulfilling thing that we were given as people that were putting the show together, that there was this food as well. So you got that constant feeling of community and sitting down at that communal table to be together in a group, which I think was incredibly important to that feeling that came out of 12th night.
Well,
yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I kind of just want to ask you, kind of circle back to some of the stuff you're talking. You're talking about a little bit about George Utter, and obviously you and Jane were very close to the Utters and the Kents, but I'm assuming particularly to Anne. We all looked at Anne with this awe because of all the stuff she did, not just for 12th night, but for the chorus in general. I mean, she was a mentor to almost all of us in different ways. She mentored Harvey into his role. She mentored so many others into their roles. She mentored me into my own career. Tell us a little bit about what Anne was like.
I'll give you a good story, a good example. Anne was probably one of the kindest people I've ever known. She had an incredible sense of humanity. And one night at my parents' house, they were living in Usquepaugh, just above the grist mill there, actually. And George and Ann came over for supper. I don't know whether Bunking and Lynn were there or not. But we were sitting there on the sofa. The two of them were sitting on the sofa. And we were talking just before dinner. And all of a sudden, we heard this snoring. And George had fallen asleep. Now, most wives would be horrified by this. And Anne just looked at us and said, oh, George has had such a terrible week. It's been an awful week for him. He's just exhausted. And she accepted it. And I thought, what a gracious thing to do.
Mm.
That, to me, epitophized Anne.
Mm.
Mm.
And you knew her. She was just absolutely amazing.
Mm.
And for some reason, if Anne, or actually Lynn also, if they told you to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge, you probably would do it.
Usually with a paintbrush in hand to make sure you're painting it on the way down or something like that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very, I think that's something too, just looking back at not just the show, but all of these things that kind of came out of all of this is there were so many, including yours, so many brilliant minds, brilliant artistic minds, creative minds. And it was rarely, these ideas would come out and it was rarely, well, we can't do them. It was just like, let's just find a way to do them and we'll figure out the rest of it later. Just inspiring.
Yeah.
Andrew, do you want
to? I just wanted to go back to one more thing that I wanted to mention, because you were talking about the dancing that would go on after the final show on Sunday, just to kind of take a look at the scope of the craziness of what that day would have been for a lot of the people involved. So many of them would have gotten up on Sunday morning and gone to sing in a choir somewhere at their church, gone to a rehearsal, gone to a church service, come in, gotten ready for the 1 o'clock show, did the 1 o'clock show, rested for a little while, and had the 4 o'clock show. After the 4 o'clock show, they would have done the Peasants' Feast, where the mummers' play would have happened, among other things. Then an 8 o'clock show, followed by a party, followed by a dance that went into the wee hours of the morning. I mean, that is absolutely insane and shows how much dedication and care people had, because they would be there for it and throw themselves so fully into that weekend.
It was a crazy time, that's for sure. And one of the things that used to drive me nuts was trying to get the schedules of who was doing what. And I would start a week before calling people, trying to make sure that who was going to be a number 3 horn in Abbots Bromley, or who was going to be the fool, or who was going to be, dancing. And, earlier in Twelfth Night, we actually did country dancing as well, not just Morris dancing. We did several sets of country dancing when we had the classes going on downstairs. We had a group that was ready to go on. But trying to organize that. And then, of course, the other crazy group were the Mummers. I mean, that was wacko. I mean, that used to drive me crazy.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because we've adequately explained that. So can you explain? Yeah, that was a highlight of the weekend too, particularly during the Peasants Feast. Can you explain a little bit? So, because some folks might not know what exactly we're talking about.
Yeah, well,
some folks. All the folks watching this probably do know what we're talking about, but I'd rather have Peter explain it as if they don't.
Well, mumming, it's fascinating to me that mummers, sword dancing, and Morris all come under the category, or they used to, under the category of Morris dancing. That's changed a lot. But mumming has nothing to do with the Philadelphia mummers. It was a traditional street play in England, still is, that basically celebrated the end of the year, where you had a play that basically was death and resurrection. You kill some character, St. George, most of the time, and he's slain representing the old year, and then a doctor revives St. George to bring him back into the new year, bringing luck to everybody. The street plays in England, the Kirby Lonsdale play that our traditional play at Westerly was fashioned after, we saw at a Morris Ale, and these guys were nuts. I'll tell you, they were half in the bag, and half of them would disappear halfway through the play, and that would be it. Somebody would straggle on 5 minutes later. I mean, it's very informal. They are very formal now, semi-formal, I should say, but they're all fun, interactive with the audience. And I just originally thought this would be a fun thing to do, not where we had to sit down and spend hours memorizing lines and come on as if we were bold actors. We were bold characters. And I think that was something that was important to us. And we had fun doing it. And to me, if we didn't have fun doing it, we shouldn't be doing it. And I hope we got across the message that a part of this was bringing back a good new year, which we sure as heck need now. And so I wish the mummers were out there rattling their cages, our cages. But anyway, that's the basic outline of mumming. And there were certain characters, as you remember, that I still, in my old coat pocket that I wear as the doctor, still have a roll from dinner from about 30 years ago.
Wow. I think we actually have a picture of the mummers at one point.
Yeah.
I think so. Ben can call it up here. He's got it. Do you know which one it is, Ben? That's the question. Does Ben know?
I labeled them.
Good.
There it is. Yeah. And
so can you tell us a little bit about, no, that's the Abbots Bromley. There it is.
There it is. Can you make that a little bigger?
Yeah, that's it.
There we go. That's a fine looking crew right there.
That's a wonderful wig you've got on, Peter.
That's actually, it's a knitted real hair wig.
Wow. And
I got it from an antique shop in Providence run by Gil Warren called The Square Peg. And it's a beautiful wig.
It looks gorgeous on you. I think one of the things that always thrilled people was seeing Charlie Kitchen in a dress.
Absolutely, especially as students.
Right. Yeah. And it looks like, if I remember right, that's Bill Crosdale as the dragon there, right?
Got the dragon there. That's right.
Wonderful dragon that came in late. That came in later.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful addition. Of course, Bill is a wonderful addition to anything. And you've got the King of Egypt. And then Alan is the lobster who went to England. Actually, the lobster went to England with us. They were fascinated by that when we toured with that.
I'm assuming that was a local addition to the Mummers play?
The lobster? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good one of the great when you talk about the audience interaction. one of the great parts about the Peasants Feast in between all those shows was the Mummers Play, but was also to watch cast, crew, and chorus alike sneak up with their little plate of dinner into the balcony to heckle all of you on the stage appropriately. One year, a woman was leaving the hall and she came up to me horrified. She's like, those gentlemen worked so hard on this, and there were people just yelling at them from the balcony. I'm like, I know, ma'am. I might have to talk them down later, but I'll make sure they're okay.
And boy, did we work hard on that.
I mean, but you talk about no one memorizing lines. I think, not that we can do it right now, I think if we tried, Andrew, a bunch of us could probably do all of the lines.
Probably.
I mean, you know, and I can even still, when they're calling for a doctor, I can still see you bouncing right across the stage, Peter. Like, I know exactly what your cue is.
I've never come yet with my big head and my little wit.
It was quite something. Well, that's a great shot. That is a great shot. Who is right behind you?
Right behind me is Les. He was our English wonderful man. We did a Zoom thing with him a couple of weeks ago. But a good Morris dancer, and I'm trying to think how we got him involved. I know that we paid part of his fare, and you guys paid part of his fare. But
we did.
An addition. I mean, he was the kindest man you could ever meet, a gentleman, and he loved every minute of it. And we loved every minute of having him here too. And you know, that's the other thing, getting other people involved, thinking, good God, this is the most amazing thing I've ever been in my life. And I think Les would say that.
He was great fun. And I always used to joke to him too, that he was our exchange student. Like, who's the guy on the stage in the different uniform? I'm like, that's the exchange student. Once a year we get a visa for an exchange Morris man. So I can't think of who one year asked me, who did I trade back? I'm like, nobody. That is just a really great picture all around there. So cool. Thanks, Ben, for showing that for us all.
Yeah, let's skip over actually to the other piece from Twelfth Night, which is actually the Abbots Bromley. Can you pull that one back?
That was the other two, Ben.
You
gotta show our faces first so we can find it. There you go.
That's right.
Yeah.
So will you tell us a little bit about what the meaning was of the Abbots Bromley originally, and what the characters are doing? What is the point of them?
Well, nobody seems to know why or how it developed, except they have records of it going back to the mid 1600s, where actually at that time the horns were painted, and they went through different stages of being painted. Later on, you had 3 sets that were painted white and 3 sets that were painted blue. Then later, there were 3 sets that were painted red and 3 sets painted white. And then later, there were gold-tipped ones and whatever. Initially, there were reindeer horns. And interestingly enough, one of the sets of horns, probably of the lead horn dancer, were dated back to the year 1000 AD, mid-1000, they were 1055 AD. Wow. So they went way back. So this dance goes way, way back. And whether or not it has to do with originally fertility or trying to get things going in the community crop-wise, don't know. But what's understood is that in this late 1600s, basically, the dance was done the Monday after Christmas. I've forgotten the name of the day in the English tradition, but it was done in the streets and out in various locations with the idea that they would collect money for the poor and for the church. And they would have a box that people put money in, and there was cake in it, and there was ale in it, and various other things. So it was something that goes way, way, way back. And I first got involved with it at Pinewoods Camp many years ago. And the interesting thing, I was the fool, which is the last character in it.
Yeah.
And at Pinewoods, it's hooked up at Pinewoods Camp, okay? It's under a full moon, under pine trees. So it's very magical. And it's the first, it's awful, this is strange to say, but out-of-body experience. I disappeared as the fool. I'll never forget that. It was a very strange feeling. And you just got absorbed in it. it was absolutely, if you talk about art experiences, that was one of the few that I've been privileged to have. And I've never had it since, never at Twelfth Night or any other place, but I just disappeared. And so I was involved with it then. My earliest involvement was at Berea College, probably, and way back then in the early 60s. And but it's quite a thing, and it really does impact people. I mean, when Anne cut it out of the script one year.
Oh, I remember that.
Cut it out of the script, and basically, I think Bunky was involved, and a whole bunch of people during the intermission or during the break. Everybody, they all went in. We did it, and the other crazy thing is that Tracy, our wonderful lighting expert, came up to me and she said, Peter, can I get an Abbots Bromley? Tracy, are you kidding? She knew that I was, Morris has been a men's dance forever and ever, and Abbots is considered a men's dance. And I said, what are you kidding? And she said, no, can I get into it? I said, let me think about it.
I think there were a fair amount of guest trees in that over the years too, weren't there?
Yeah, but I don't think people realized she was up there as one of the dancers. And I loved that. I mean, it helped change my attitude towards all this traditional stuff, because tradition changes over the years.
That's true.
But Anne left it out that one year, and boy, did she regret it. She said to me afterwards, she said, Peter, I learned a lesson. I'm not leaving that out.
I think where it got stuck was in the Peasants Feast. Like, I think we started the actual Peasants Feast.
Yeah,
I do remember this because I remember I must have been 16 or so, and I do remember it happening. It's funny. So we did a little fun on Monday, and we had tree auditions online. And just to prep for it, I went and I was trying to read about, Abbots Bromley, the village, everything. So there's a lot on the internet about it now, but there are so many videos of different people doing Abbots. Yeah. And it made me happy because in almost each circumstance, not all of them, I did see the CDSS ones too. They were nearly identical. I mean, the outfits are a little bit different, the horns are a little bit different, and the music was nearly always the same, and the beat was nearly all the same. And I was like, well, this is really quite cool. I just had never realized. I mean, I knew from you, because for years and years I've been listening to this, obviously. Yeah. I knew for you it's old and it's English, and of course we love things that are old in English. Yeah. But I didn't realize, now that we have the proliferation of the internet and YouTube, I was like, boy, there's like 1,000 videos of this out there. This is bigger than I thought.
The original Abbots Bromley now in England, basically the tune we use is da dum ba dum da dum ba dum da dee da la dee da la da da la dum. The tune they use in England, it's really jazzed up. And
wow,
sounds like Yankee Doodle.
Completely different feeling. Yeah.
What's the exchange rate? It gets a little weird in the music world.
Yeah, well, it does. But, so that it's changed tremendously. I'm not even sure, although I'm a little bit sure, that probably originally it was more like the dee-dum, ba-dum, dee-dum, ba-dum. But I think over the years it just changed. And in this country, we picked up on that dee-dum thing and hooked it up. I mean, it's really, as I said, at Pinewoods, under a full moon, pine trees, that sort of thing, which is fine. I think it was wonderful. For my time growing up with it, it was magic, true magic.
Well, why don't we actually have a clip of that? So how about we show the audience what we're talking about now?
There's the tune.
Yeah, the horns are actually resting in our cellar here, and they came about through George. He got them; they were on loan from somebody, not even sure who, but and that person finally gave them to us, and so they're downstairs, and as I said, resting, just waiting.
And you tell that story you told me about the visitor to your basement?
The furnace man. He turned around. Here were these horns on the wall, and he said, "What are those?"
Should have said old furnace men.
Yeah. 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 Jane also made the hoods for our we used to wear burlap that were sort of, well, they were fine for the time, but Jane made the hoods, and incidentally, all the vests for the Morrismen, for the most part, were hand embroidered by Jane with the green man on the back, traditional stock character, very intricately done. And so I'm grateful to her for doing all that work.
I will say I still have my vest from my very short time of being a Morrisman hanging in my closet with my buttons all over it.
Okay.
It's waiting to be resurrected.
Yeah, but you're welcome to come back, you know.
Thank you. I know. Maybe someday when my schedule lightens up, you know.
I mean, I come see that, so I'll endorse that. Yes, on that.
I think you should do it too, Ryan. We could have some fun.
Oh, you know how nimble I am on my feet.
You know that the Morrismen did have fun. You know the Morrismen's lair.
Oh yes.
After a few years, which was that main room at the bottom of the elevator, that was where we congregated for quite a while, and we were in the hallway briefly outside the offices, which was awful, but because people were tripping over us and I think wondering what we were doing. And of course, we were in the habit of consuming a certain beverage at times that some people were upset about. We always wondered why Bunky didn't shriek at us. But, you know, he was very polite. He realized that this was all part of the tradition.
That creative process for Morrismen.
Yeah, creative process.
Yeah, he had other stuff to worry about. There was one show, so just to pick on Bunky for a second here, and I love you, Bunky, where we're in the middle of all of something. He was in the middle of the run. He's walking out the door. He's got his hat on, and I was like, where are you going? He's like, got to go check on my boat. I'm thinking, oh, please don't get on the boat right now. Like, I need you back in 25 minutes or whatever it was. So we were having some storm and he just went down to check on the boat and he came back. But
speaking of crazy things and crazy things that the Morrismen had happened, there was this one time we were going up to the Canterbury Fair, and, you know, George bought a van for the Morrismen, and it said on the side, the Westerly Morrismen. And so we were all in this van going to pick Wally Fenn up at Rhode Island Hospital, where he was the controller. And so Wally was in the van. We were going to pick him up at the hospital, and we got to the hospital entrance, which was up on a little rise. And we slid open the door as Wally came out in his suit and tie. We slid open the door, and about 12 beer cans fell out and rolled down the hill from the hospital. And, you know, that's typical craziness in those days. You could get away with that, and it was just nuts. I mean, we had so many crazy experiences that I think developed our character.
I've heard a lot of similar stories about Chorus of Westerly stuff in general, not just Westerly Morrismen. So I think it was a different era, definitely.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
We often joke that it's probably good that things like Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and all that didn't exist 20, 30 years ago, where so much of the creative process might have been stuck in its tracks right then and there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very different time.
So I'm interested. You've talked a little bit about it, but the Westerly Morrismen obviously don't exist solely for Twelfth Night and Summer Pops, as many people see them in their, you know, the largest audiences. What does a season look like for the Morrismen other than that? What else do you do?
Well, during the COVID, of course, not much.
Right.
We did dance on May Day, two of us actually, and then Lantern Hill, we had the first experience of having the state police come.
Oh, that when I saw that news article, I I mean, with great love, I was dying laughing. I read it. I was like, oh, I sent it around. I'm like, I know these guys.
Yeah, well, we were dancing down in the street. I am not climbing Lantern Hill any longer. I'm almost 80, and I just don't want to risk,
Yeah.
busting up or something. So I play at the bottom, and a certain dedicated group goes to the top. And this is on the first day of spring, the vernal equinox. And so we're down there dancing. It's raining, and all of a sudden, this trooper arrives, lights on his car, said there'd been a complaint that there were rowdies dancing in the street. And, and fortunately, I knew the trooper because he was a member. I'm involved with the firehouse here as a fire police captain. Anyway, so he arrived, and I went up and talked to him, and he laughed, and he said, "Oh, this is great. I'll put it on the state police webpage."
Wow.
which he did.
Some good press for the Morris men.
Oh, the headline was something like "State Police called for rowdy riot" or something like that. Discover Morris dancers.
Yeah,
I only saw that, and it was not like a regular feed. It was like in a feed up here outside of Boston. And I knew I didn't even have to open the article. It's like I know what's happening here.
well,
That's wonderful.
it's crazy. Things about Morris dancing appears, for example, in the New Yorker every once in a while. They'll have a cartoon about Morris dancing and the rowdy Morris dancers. And they get a bad rap at times, although sometimes it's deserved. I mean, because they basically have a good time. And the other events that we do, Andrew, are basically church fairs, and I'm trying to think what else recently we've done, but it's been very slow now. We're getting to be quite old, so that we don't have a lot, and it's very hard to get new young dancers to join us, and that's part of the problem. We have about, I think, 10 semi-active dancers, and we have a heck of a time trying to get 6 or 8, for pops or for whatever. But anybody who's interested in joining, they can get in touch with me or any of the dancers. But mostly civic groups we dance for, or for spring events, fairs, and there are still ales around. We don't go to a lot of ales. We used to go to quite a number, and an ale is simply where you've got a group of Morris dancers coming together. And the reason it's called an ale is pretty obvious. There's a fair amount of drinking beer.
Wow.
And celebrating. Yeah.
Of course. Wait, I'm sorry. I'm still fascinated by this. So you said early on that the Morris men toured back when, and I kind of knew that, but can you just tell us a little bit about those experiences? Because I've heard lots about Chorus of Westerly tours, and I've heard that there were Morris men tours, but only like in the mythical world that was the past. And I'd love to know something more about them.
Well, I think there were 4, 3 in England and 1 in Scotland. And one of the funniest, and basically we would go to host, we would visit host teams. And in fact, we had a team, the Bampton men came and visited us here. And we toured New London and Norwich, I think, and various local areas with them, and did a huge big country dance at the center, at the George Kent Hall now, whatever it's called. But that was great. But a tour is, I'm sorry, our tours in England, we were hosted by wonderful families, and followed by huge evening events and everything else. And it was like, just absolutely magic. I'm trying to think of one tour in particular that was, trying to think. The Scottish tour was pretty incredible. They were all incredible. And George,
Did you go to be part of festivals?
yeah, part of festivals, Thaxted and Morris Ales. It was part of the annual Morris Ale for the Ring. The Ring is a confederation of Morris teams in England, and Pinewoods is a member. We're not an official member, but we were invited, and we were their honored guests. And you dance for 3 solid days, and there's a church service, where oftentimes Morris musicians play the hymns, and we danced in the cathedral in Thaxted, and I played pipe and tabor there. It was that was a wonderful experience also. But yeah, it's just a lot of fun. And George organized all of these things. God bless him. I mean, he spent a lot of time doing that. And he also had a Morris Men's newsletter that we sent out. And he was our bagman, as they call him, secretary treasurer. And he just loved Morris dancing. He adored it.
Well, so
no, just for never mind.
Just shifting gears on something else I'm curious about. We asked Darren when we did his interview last week how Anne introduced him to what was Twelfth Night in Westerly and described it to him and convinced him to come. And he actually said, I'm pretty sure it was Peter Leibert that did that. So I'm curious, how did you approach Darren, and what did you tell him Twelfth Night was? How did you say, hey, we've got this show, we're looking for a director, this is what it's about? How do you describe a show like Twelfth Night?
I was trying to remember that, Andrew, and I was having difficulty with it, but I'm going to imagine what it was. Because Darren was a student at Conn College, and I was teaching. I taught there for 37 years. And, so I would see him off and on. And I'm sure at some time or another, I just said, good God, Darren, you've got to get involved with this. It is something you will never forget. It's a magical thing. I can't describe it. You've just got to see it. And I think that may have prompted him to get involved with it, because I think any sort of description would not be accurate that you could say. You've just got to
tried.
You've got to really feel it.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
We are very grateful that you did talk to Darren about it, and that it ended up working out, because he was fabulous in his 10 years with us. And we were lucky to have him.
Yeah.
I feel
20. He was there 20 years.
20 years, yes. Sorry, not 20 years, yes.
Not 20. That's not right. 15. I don't know what year. What year is
Let's
it?
call it 13.
Somewhere between 10 and 20. I don't know. Maybe it was 6, 7, 8, 9.
Last week someone did say 20. Anyway, whatever. Whatever. However long he was there, we were really glad to have him.
We'll edit that later.
Yeah, no, we won't.
No, we won't.
Peter, one other thing. I'm wondering, do you have your instrument? Would you play us a song?
What, are you kidding? Yeah, no, I won't. No, I'll just play. I got to stand up, I think.
Sorry, we can go to commercial. I'm kidding. We don't have commercials.
No, I'll play. You know what I'll play is Ring of Bells, which is one of my favorite tunes. And then I'll go into the Maid of the Mill at the end. You remember Ring of Bells? Probably not. The Maid of the Mill. And I'm not going to sing the words, but... not the Maid of the Mill.
Yay!
I was waving my mythical hanky here.
Yeah, that. The crazy thing is, I said that's not the Maid of the Mill. That happened on the stage several times. There are two tunes that are very similar, and I start playing one and I get into the other one. And, it's just
It
fun.
all worked out. It all worked out.
Well, it's fun stuff. People see that you're human, I hope.
Right, exactly. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Thank you for playing for us, for having this conversation. Thank you for all that you brought to Twelfth Night for so many years, and for sharing that with us, and for still being a part of everything now. It's wonderful to know you, and it's been a great conversation with you today. So thank you for sharing all of this.
Well, thank you. I want to say one other thing, if I could.
Sure.
12th Night hasn't gone away for us. The burning of the broom has taken its place, sort of. So it's kept us going on that level. And I hope that I was convinced that once you drop a tradition, you can't bring it back. I'm not sure that's the case now, because I've seen you guys that have given so much to this, especially this series that you're doing, the 12 Days of Christmas. It's a reminder of how important it was. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it's certainly all of this, all of the time and love and energy that you gave to the show, that Bunky gave to the show, Anne gave to the show, Darren gave to the show, Harvey gave to the show. I mean, I could go on and on and on. All of those people that you see in those programs year after year, either on the stage or in the, listed in the back, get so much to it. I think it's just a testament to really, we happen to be in a community that's had so many just wonderful people that have sustained such a great artistic climate to let this go, but they're just good people. And you've been a friend to us, to us, and so has so many of those other folks. And I was been talking back and forth with your son Damon the other day, and it's really inspiring. So thank you for all that you've done, and to everyone out there who's been involved with all of this, with the chorus, 12th Night, everything. Really, thank you. And we're at this period right now where it's tough because of COVID. It's hard to even think about when we can have concerts again, but we'll get there. We'll get there. And 12th Night was always about hope, right? And light coming out of darkness. And I can start to see the crack of the light. And so I think something good will happen soon.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for being with us. And thank you all for watching again. Hope you're enjoying these 12 days of 12th Night, and keep watching for the next few days as we round out the series.
More to come. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. Cheers.
Good night.